I smiled, congratulated them, then uncovered the truth they never thought I'd find. Before starting the story, please subscribe and like the video and listen through end for chill. I asked the question the way any mother would, casually, gently, almost absent-mindedly. We were standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my son, Daniel, learned to walk, learned to read, learned to steal cookies when he thought I wasn't looking. His wife, my daughter-in-law, Lena, stood across from me, scrolling through her phone as if she were waiting for a message more important than anything in that room. "So," I said, forcing a smile, "have you two finally picked a wedding date?" She didn't look up right away. There was a pause, not the kind where someone is thinking, but the kind where someone is deciding how much truth you deserve. Then she smiled. "Oh," she said lightly, "we got married yesterday." The room went quiet, not dramatically, not with a crash or a gasp, quiet in the way your ears ring after something explodes. "Yesterday?" I repeated. She nodded, finally looking at me. Her eyes were calm, confident, almost relieved. "Yeah, just a small thing. Court marriage, very simple." I turned to Daniel, expecting confusion on his face, guilt maybe, embarrassment. Instead, he wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew. This wasn't sudden, this was planned, and I was never meant to know. I congratulated them, I hugged them, I even joked, because that's what women like me do when our hearts crack in half. We make it easier for everyone else. "Well," I laughed softly, "I guess I should have asked sooner." Lena smiled again, a polite smile, the kind you give strangers. Daniel kissed my cheek and said, "We didn't want a fuss, Mom." A fuss. I watched them leave my house hand in hand, and only when the door closed did I let my knees buckle. Because it wasn't the wedding that hurt. It was the realization that my son had crossed a threshold without me and hadn't even looked back. Lena entered Daniel's life 3 years earlier. She was beautiful, intelligent, controlled. From the start, she spoke softly but decided firmly. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. People moved around her naturally, adjusting themselves to fit her comfort. At first, she was polite to me, almost too polite, but slowly, quietly, she began to rearrange things. Daniel stopped calling as often. Family dinners became too busy. Holidays were split, then skipped, then forgotten. When I asked, Daniel would say, "Lena just needs space," or "She's not used to close families like ours." And because I loved my son, I stepped back. Again, and again, and again, until stepping back became disappearing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, scrolling through social media, telling myself I was being dramatic. Then I saw it, a photo on Lena's cousin's Instagram story. Daniel in a navy suit, Lena in a white dress, not grand, not simple either. Flowers, a small group of people, laughter. A wedding. Tagged location, a garden 20 minutes from my house. My hands shook. This wasn't a courthouse whim. This was a celebration. Small, yes, but deliberate, curated. And I wasn't there? The next morning, I called Daniel. "Why wasn't I invited?" I asked quietly. Silence. Then, "Mom, it was complicated." "For who?" Another pause. "Lena didn't think it would be comfortable." "Comfortable for whom?" I pressed. "For her." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about simplicity. It was about control. Weeks later, I learned the truth, not from Daniel, but from someone who didn't realize they were revealing anything. Lena's sister. We ran into each other at a grocery store. She smiled awkwardly and said, "I hope you weren't too upset about the wedding." "I was surprised," I said carefully. She frowned. "But Lena said you didn't approve of her." My chest tightened. "What?" She said you were very controlling, that you made Daniel feel guilty all the time, that you didn't want him to marry her. I felt sick, because I had never said those things, but I had done something worse. I had stayed silent long enough for someone else to write my role in the story. I asked Daniel to meet me alone, no Lena, no buffer, just mother and son. I need you to listen, I said, not as her husband, as my child. He looked tired, older than his years. I told him everything, the missed calls, the distancing, the wedding photo, the lies. When I finished, he whispered, "She said you'd react like this." Like what? That you're trying to turn me against her. That's when I stopped talking, because you can't argue with a story someone has lived in long enough. Here's the truth no one prepares you for. You don't always lose your children to rebellion. Sometimes you lose them to someone who convinces them love is something to escape. Lena didn't steal my son. She just slowly replaced me in his world, and I made it easy by stepping aside. I didn't beg. I didn't fight. I sent Daniel one message. I love you. I will always be here, but I won't compete for a place that should never have been negotiable. Then I stopped calling, stopped chasing, stopped apologizing for existing. Months passed. Then one evening my phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" And in that moment I understood something important. Sometimes the wedding happens without you. Sometimes the betrayal does too. But your dignity? That's the one thing no one can take unless you hand it over. I asked when the wedding was, and my daughter-in-law said, "We got married yesterday." But what she really meant was, "You were never part of the plan." And learning to live with that truth, without losing yourself, was the hardest vow I ever had to keep. Daniel's voice on the phone sounded unfamiliar, softer, careful, as if every word had to pass through someone else before reaching me. "Can we talk?" he asked again. "Yes," I said, "when you're ready." There was another pause. Then, quietly, "I don't think Lena would be comfortable if I came alone." I closed my eyes, and just like that, I understood this conversation was already happening with 3 people, even though only 2 of us were on the line. We met a week later at a cafe halfway between our homes, neutral ground, no memories, no comfort. Lena sat beside him, her hand rested on his knee, not affectionately but possessively, a reminder. She smiled first. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," as if I had requested an audience. "I didn't," I replied calmly. "Daniel did." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Lena continued anyway. "We just want peace, no misunderstandings, no emotional pressure." There it was, the accusation dressed as diplomacy. "I'm not here to pressure anyone," I said calmly. "I just want to understand why my own son's wedding happened 20 minutes from my house without my knowledge." Lena tilted her head sympathetically. "We were protecting our mental health." Protecting? From me? She spoke smoothly, gently. Every sentence sounded reasonable if you ignored the implication beneath it. "You've always been very present in Daniel's life," she said. "He needed space to become his own person. The wedding was about us, not extended family dynamics. We didn't want old patterns resurfacing." Old patterns? I looked at Daniel. What patterns? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Lena answered for him. "The guilt, the expectations, the emotional dependence." I felt something snap inside my chest, not loudly, but permanently. Because this wasn't just exclusion anymore. This was character assassination. I could have defended myself, listed every sacrifice, every night I stayed up, every boundary I respected, but suddenly I saw it clearly. Anything I said would be used as proof of her narrative, so I did the one thing she didn't expect. I nodded. "If that's how you see me," I said, "then I respect your distance." Lena blinked. Daniel frowned. "Mom, that's not—" "No," I interrupted gently. It's okay. I turned to Lena. But understand this, distance is not the same as disappearance. Her smile tightened. After that meeting, the silence became official. No messages, no invitations, no updates. I learned about Daniel's life the way strangers do, through filtered photos and carefully worded captions. Promotion, new apartment, anniversary trip. Always her hand visible, never my name mentioned. And then came the final cut. I found out through a mutual friend that they were expecting a child, a grandchild. I was not told. That was the darkest part. Not anger, grief. I grieved my son as if he had died, except he hadn't. He was alive, laughing, building a family, just not with me. I packed away his childhood photos, stopped cooking his favorite meals, stopped setting an extra plate at holidays. I didn't want reminders anymore, because hope, when starved long enough, becomes cruelty. 2 years later, at 2:14 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel, crying. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say, "Finally." I didn't say anything. I just listened. Lena had isolated him from friends, controlled finances, read his messages, decided who was safe. The same patterns she accused me of. Projection wears a convincing disguise. "I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered. I closed my eyes, tears sliding silently down my face, and still I didn't rush in. "I love you," I said, "but I won't rescue you by becoming your shield again." Silence. "I'll support you," I continued, "if you're ready to stand on your own, not if I'm just replacing one control with another." That was the hardest thing I've ever said as a mother, but it was the only honest thing. Daniel left her months later. Not dramatically, not heroically, quietly, exhausted, awake. We are rebuilding now, slowly, cautiously, honestly. But our relationship will never return to what it was. And that's okay, because love that survives manipulation doesn't look like devotion. It looks like respect. Rebuilding didn't happen the way movies promise. There were no tearful reunions, no sudden apologies, no clean villain ending. Daniel moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. No furniture except a mattress on the floor, no photos on the walls, no sense of permanence. He came to my house for dinner the first time 6 weeks after leaving Lena. He stood at the doorway like a guest who wasn't sure he'd be welcomed. "I'll leave if this is uncomfortable," he said. I stepped aside. "Sit. Eat. You don't have to explain yourself today." He broke down halfway through the meal. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quiet sobs. Ashamed sobs. The kind that come from realizing how much time you lost. Over months, not days, pieces of the truth surfaced. How Lena rewrote small moments until they sounded dangerous. How every disagreement ended with him apologizing. How she framed isolation as choosing peace. How she convinced him love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant obedience. "She used to say," he whispered one night, "that if I defended you, it meant I wasn't ready to be a husband." I didn't answer, because rage wouldn't heal him, and I had already mourned the version of myself who would have fought. There was one subject we didn't touch, the baby. Until one evening, Daniel said quietly, "She doesn't want you to see him." I nodded. "I know." "She says you'll confuse him." I smiled sadly. Babies aren't confused by love. But here was the boundary, the one that mattered most. I would not beg to be a grandmother. Love doesn't crawl. 3 months later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, Lena's handwriting. Inside, no apology, only control dressed as generosity. I think it's healthier if we define roles clearly. You may see the child under supervision, occasionally. We want stability and no emotional interference. I folded the letter carefully, then I handed it back to Daniel. This, I said calmly, is where I stopped negotiating my humanity. I didn't go to court. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I simply stepped back, again, but this time by choice, not erasure. I will be here when your son is old enough to ask who I am, I told Daniel, and if that day never comes, I will still be whole. That was the moment my son truly saw me, not as a leverage, not as a weakness, not as a backup plan, but a woman who would not disappear to make others comfortable. Control fails when it loses witnesses. Lena's certainty cracked when Daniel stopped reacting, stopped explaining, stopped choosing sides. She escalated, then unraveled, and eventually she left, taking the child with her. That pain nearly broke him, but this time he didn't crawl back to the nearest authority. He stood. Legal battles followed, mediation, paperwork, waiting. I supported, financially when asked, emotionally when invited, never unsolicited, never intrusive. And one morning, almost 4 years after the secret wedding, Daniel called. "I'm bringing him," he said. "My son, if you're ready." He was small, curious, unaware of history. He didn't know he was a bridge, or a wound, or a victory. He just smiled. And I understood something profound. Love doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs integrity. I asked when the wedding was, and my daughter-in-law said, "We got married yesterday." That sentence thought these ended my silence. And sometimes the most powerful legacy you leave your children is not sacrifice, but self-respect strong enough to survive being excluded. Meeting my grandson didn't heal everything. That's the lie people like to tell, that children mend what adults break. They don't. They reveal it. I saw Daniel differently now, not as my child who had been stolen, not as a victim who needed saving, but as a man learning, too late, painfully, how fragile identity becomes when you hand it to someone else. He watched me with his son the way someone watches fire for the first time. Careful, alert, afraid of what it might burn. I didn't overstep, didn't buy toys without asking, didn't insert opinions, didn't insert myself. Because love, when mature, knows when to be quiet. Some nights after putting the baby to sleep, Daniel would sit at my kitchen table and stare at nothing. "I don't trust my own judgment," he admitted once. "Every decision feels like a trap." That's the residue of control no one warns you about. Even after escape, the prison remains. Internal, invisible, efficient. Lena was gone from his daily life, but her voice still lived in his head. "You're wrong. You're selfish. You'll ruin everything." And I couldn't silence it for him. I had to let him learn to challenge it himself. A year later, Lena reached out again, not to Daniel, to me. Her message was calm, almost gracious. "For the sake of the child, I think it's best we put the past behind us. We were all emotional. No one was entirely right or wrong." That sentence was her final attempt to dilute, to blur, to escape accountability. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied with only this: "I agree we should move forward, but not by pretending we didn't bleed." She never wrote back. Daniel sometimes asks, carefully, "Do you think we'll ever be like before?" I always answer honestly, "No." And then I add, "But we can be something better." Before, our relationship was built on obligation, on roles, on unspoken expectations. Now it's built on consent. He chooses to call. I choose to answer. We choose honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. That's not less love. That's adult love. Here's what took me the longest to understand. Being excluded didn't make me weak. Staying silent too long did. I thought endurance was love. I thought patience was virtue. I thought stepping back made me generous, but there is a line where patience becomes permission, and I crossed it until I didn't. If your child slowly stops seeing you, if your presence becomes too much, if your love is reframed as a threat, pause. Not to fight, not to accuse, but to ask yourself one question. Am I shrinking to stay connected? Because love that demands you disappear is not love that will ever let you stay. I asked when the wedding was, and my daughter-in-law said, "We got married yesterday." That sentence, though, didn't just exclude me, it reprogrammed me. And unlearning that damage has been the hardest, loneliest work of my life. Because the most dangerous manipulation is the one that convinces you your love was the problem all along. If that story gave you chills, drop a like, subscribe, and comment so I know you made it to the end. I've got another one. See you then.